Good morning, everyone. When Tom asked if I would be interested in delivering a sermon about mental health and spirituality, I immediately said yes. I felt connected to the topic and really didn't even need to think twice about agreeing to the request. However, sitting down to actually write the sermon proved to be a much more difficult feat than I had anticipated. I was naive about the amount of thoughtfulness, care, and organization that creating a sermon entails. I really can't believe that you guys do this every single week. At first, it felt impossible to capture all my thoughts on the subject. The connection between spirituality and mental health is a big topic. But as I got into organizing and piecing together different concepts, it turned into not only a more challenging feat than I had anticipated, but a much more precious process than I had expected it to be. Over the past couple of weeks, I contemplated, reflected, and meditated on the connection. What is the connection between spirituality and mental health? It's kind of like a Venn diagram. They are each their own separate realm, but there is so much overlap. Spirituality is anything that allows you to feel connected to the all. And mental health is your journey of integrating your fragmented pieces to remember your innate wholeness. The journey of self-acceptance. The overlap between the two is when we use our challenges, our struggles, and our distress as gateways to wholeness, our inherent divine essence. The overlap is when we directly face the energies of grasping, anger, pride, fear, and shame, the habits that keep the heart closed. I truly hope that these words and thoughts resonate with you in an honest and thoughtful way. For anything that does resonate with you, wonderful. I invite you to take that with you. And for anything that does not, just leave that here with me. So I invite you to close your eyes if that feels comfortable for you. And if not, just leave them open. If it feels better to let the eyes close or to leave them open, then I invite you just to lower the gaze and soften the gaze to a fixed point in front of you. We're only going to be here for a few minutes. This is a more condensed version of what I usually do when I conduct this meditation. But for now, just see if you can settle into your seat. Direct your attention inward. And if it feels comfortable for you, I invite you to connect with your breath. And bringing a gentle attention to each in-breath and to each out-breath. And for the next bit of time, just watch the flow of your breathing. And thoughts will most likely be there, right? The thoughts will most likely continue to pass through. But see if there's the opportunity this morning just to watch them pass through without getting attached to them or swept away by thinking. See if there's the opportunity to gently return to your breath. I next invite you to bring to mind an emotion that you've had difficulty with over the past couple weeks or so. Some emotion that might be trickier than others when it shows up to visit. I next invite you to bring this emotion into tangible form. Allow yourself to picture the emotion as if it were to come and visit you. Notice any colors, the size, the feel. And I next invite you to imagine yourself there with the emotion. The two of you are sitting together. And acknowledge one another with some sort of greeting, maybe a bow, maybe a handshake, or just a simple nod. And I invite you to ask the emotion, when you come and visit, what is it that you need? When you come to visit, what is it that you need? And I next invite you to ask, when you come and visit, is there any message that you have? Is there anything that you need or want me to know? And finally, you ask yourself, when this emotion comes to visit, is there anything that I need? How can I support myself? Now we're just going to be here a little longer. Trust that there's really no right or wrong way to do this. Whatever information you're getting, wonderful. Any information that you're not getting, completely fine too. With your next in-breath, just note anything important that came to you. And with subtle movements, begin to move the body in little ways that feel good. And if you've had your eyes closed, open them whenever you're ready to do so. So as I mentioned, that was a bite-sized version of what I like to typically do with clients and other people that I work with. We'll do a more extended version of that to really allow yourself to go in and feel the process of it. But I'll often weave this type of meditation into sessions with my clients. Afterward, we'll process the experience and what it was like for them. Most of the time, they talk about how making the emotion tangible and talking with it allowed them to create a different kind of connection with and to the emotion. They'll notice how the emotion isn't so scary after all. They'll comment on how the emotion was only trying to deliver information, that the emotion is only a messenger. And when we practice relating to our emotions as messengers, instead of little destructive gremlins, everything begins to open. We learn how to become more responsive instead of reactive. We learn how to listen to ourselves. We learn how to trust ourselves. We learn that anger shows us what we're passionate about, where our boundaries are, and what you believe needs to change about the world. Guilt shows you where you are making choices outside of your value system, or where you're still living in other people's expectations of what you should do. Bitterness shows you where you need to heal and where you're still holding judgments of others or yourself. Anxiety shows you where you're not living in the present and invites you to return to the now. Our culture is obsessed with reaching out externally for things that will distract and numb our emotions. We are conditioned to believe that if we get the promotion, the person, the status, the car, then we will be happy. Then we will be satisfied. And in the meantime, we can attempt to keep the stress at bay with our shiny new toys. The mental health path of spirituality is a little bit different. Instead of grasping outward, the spiritual path of healing invites you to go inward and connect with what you find. Accept what you find. Love what you find. The spiritual path encourages you to move closer to what doesn't feel good, instead of using the usual tactics of distracting, numbing, repressing, and avoiding what doesn't feel good. It seems a bit strange, doesn't it? Move closer to what doesn't feel good, move closer to what feels uncomfortable. But that's where the growth is. No one grows by staying comfortable. No, growth involves risking going beyond your comfort zone and into the foreign territory of the unknown. The meditation we just did, that was a visit inward. That was an opportunity to connect in dialogue with an emotion that you might usually avoid. What was that like for you? Choosing to go inward and listen. If it resonated, how might you be able to weave in time throughout the day to visit yourself? The 13th century Persian poet Rumi, whose poem The Guest House we just heard, he would ask people, do you pay regular visits to yourself? Do you pay regular visits to yourself? When I first heard this quote, I didn't understand why at first, but I felt it was important. I sat with it for a while. Did I pay regular visits to myself? At first, I wondered what he meant by visits. What does a visit entail? And how frequently must the visits occur to qualify as regular? For everyone, I'm sure the answer is different, and I'm sure it ebbs and flows and changes throughout life. Take a moment now and ask yourself, if you were to make regular visits to yourself, what would that look like? Or if you already do visit yourself, what does that look like? What does it mean to pay yourself visits? In sessions with clients, we'll explore how they're integrating self-visits into their daily lives. Some clients talk about how they visited themselves while taking a walk through the woods, others while they were cooking, and some while they were doing yoga, walking, or even driving. What I've noticed is that the practice of checking in with themselves becomes a sort of sacred and spiritual ritual for them. Connecting with their own inner self helps them feel connected to life. Paying themselves a visit becomes a practice of listening to, showing up for, and learning how to care for themselves. It becomes a practice of connecting with their divine nature, the kingdom within. In visiting yourself and greeting yourself, you notice how each visit is an expression of divine connection, no matter what the visit is like. Visiting yourself involves spending time with all your parts and pieces, especially the ones that you would rather avoid or just straight up get rid of. Letting yourself meet and get to know the various parts of you is the gateway to self-acceptance. Get to know the parts you love, the parts that you're ashamed of, the parts that you might not even yet know exist. Listen to their stories, hear their worries, their fears, their triumphs. Often my clients will want to get rid of certain parts of themselves. They'll decide the parts are bad, unworthy, or unacceptable. The parts get repressed, avoided, shamed, and ridiculed. I honestly do feel for all the fragmented and forgotten parts and pieces. I can feel how they truly just need love and care. When clients start talking about uprooting and tossing certain self parts, I usually rather softly offer an alternative. What if instead of getting rid of the parts, if we were to practice bringing some degree of acceptance, maybe even care to them? I usually receive an array of responses anywhere from laughter to a hesitant, okay, let's try that, to just staring at me blankly. Trust me, I get it. There are plenty of parts of myself that I'm definitely not thrilled about. We all have them. Some of them are tangible, some are intangible, but for different reasons and in different ways, we have decided that they are obstacles on the way to our ideal self. And in this society, what do we tend to do with obstacles? We tend to plow through them, conquer them, remove them. Basically, we try to destroy them, which is sometimes needed, but not when it comes to spiritual health. When it comes to spiritual health, we need to bring a truly loving acceptance to the obstacles, all of the obstacles. Because in the realm of spiritual health, the obstacles are precious parts and pieces of your unique self. They are your way in. Into what? Into your full and whole self, into your Christ consciousness. The Buddhist nun, Xuan Quan, can demonstrate the essence and practice of self-acceptance certainly better than I can explain it. I didn't know who Quan was until I saw her on an episode of Chef's Table. Quan is a Buddhist nun, an informal chef of Korean cuisine, who lives in a Buddhist temple in South Korea. I could easily go into how mindfully she prepared and served her dishes, how delicious they all looked. But what stood out the most was her garden. The garden at the temple was not like many gardens you'd see in the West or other parts of the world. No, this garden was full of weeds and grass. Everything was growing on top of everything, and it didn't seem to follow any logical pattern or system. It was just growing. Kwan smiled as she pulled different vegetables from the garden. She described how she loved all the insects and could enjoy the flowers, how all the insects could enjoy the flowers and the plants, and that the weeds were deserving of space too. Occasionally, the nuns would prune or weed a bit just to help different plants flourish, but for the most part, she said, the nuns at the temple just let the garden be its gloriously flawed self. So how do we do this? It sounds great, doesn't it? Bringing our loving self-acceptance to our full, unique self. It sounds magical. So what does this look like on the ground level? How do we actually practice loving self-acceptance? We start by going inward, by listening to and feeling our feelings, by practicing patience with ourselves and practicing patience when we forget to practice patience with ourselves, by remembering that we all mess up and therefore can connect with one another through that shared suffering. And as we have more patience and compassion for our own perfectly flawed self, our patience and compassion for others grow as well. Learning the art of self-love through the practice of self-acceptance connects us with divine love because it teaches us how to love unconditionally. It teaches us how to let go of wanting things to be a certain kind of way before we can be okay, before we can be happy, before we can love. Learning the art of self-love allows us to appreciate all our perfectly imperfect pieces, and through that self-appreciation, we come to genuinely appreciate the perfectly imperfect pieces of others too. Much of spiritual life is self-acceptance, maybe all of it. This quote by psychologist and meditation teacher Jack Kornfield reminds us that the spiritual journey is not about getting things to be a certain way to be okay. Instead, it's about learning how to be okay, even when things do not feel or look okay. But being okay with things does not mean apathy. It does not mean throwing your hands up in defeat or accepting injustice. No. It means that regardless of the external circumstances, you maintain your inner peace. You choose your happiness. You choose that your inner freedom can and never will be defined by external measurement, that no individual or system can take away or tarnish your inner kingdom. What would it be like if we could treat ourselves the way that Kwan and her sisters treat their garden in Korea? They don't shame or judge any of the plants. They don't kill any of the insects. They, for the most part, let the weeds and grasses grow free, knowing that they too carry value and worth. All parts are needed, all parts are seen, and all parts are appreciated. I invite you this week to explore your inner realm in ways that resonate with you. Explore for you where and how mental health meets spirituality, your spiritual health. I invite you this week to check in with yourself. Ask yourself, how am I doing today? And listen. Show yourself that you're there. Hear and feel your emotions. Remember that they are not evil little gremlins, but they are informative messengers here to support you on your journey to remembering your inherent divine wholeness. Take the time to be with yourself and take the time to care. Have a blessed and beautiful week, everyone.